make this point, as I think it's, I think, at least important to my understanding of Lamentations and what the prophet Jeremiah is experiencing, what he's expressing. Psalms 30 and verse 5 says, "For his anger is but for a moment, his favor is for a lifetime. Weeping may last for the night, but a shout of joy comes in the morning." New American Standard. So the psalmist here is saying what about the nature of God? Why is his anger for a moment? As opposed to permanent. What's the nature of God that makes his anger for a moment?
Because he's merciful.
Sorry?
He's merciful.
Because he's merciful? Because he loves his children? We get angry with our children, don't we? Oh, let's be honest. But hopefully it's brief, and the love and the joy that your children bring you overcome that anger. I think what makes Lamentations such a tough read is that Jeremiah is dealing with the devastation that comes to the nation. And to be clear, there's no question but what this devastation is the result of their sin. The Lamentations talks about how they have been now, metaphorically speaking, spurned by their lovers. There's no more interest in this young maiden because she's deflowered. She is now starving, filthy, and she's no fun anymore. And the Chaldeans, the Proto-Babylonian people, have taken captives and have spoiled the nation. But the sense of isolation and desperation and desolation that Jeremiah expresses here, what makes it so difficult is he sees no end to it in his language. Now that changes throughout the course of the book of Lamentations. The Lamentation writing is a very poetic form. Most of the chapters take the form of, or several of the chapters take the form of beginning with each of the Hebrew alphabet. So A, B, C, it's not A, B, C, but the Hebrew alphabet, I don't know it, forms the structure for the poems that are written. And you see just a despair and a sense of permanence in this that makes this so difficult. And you can't talk and find Lamentations in your Bible at the same time. I've just figured that out. So I've got to shut up for a minute. I still can't find it. I wanted to turn to Lamentations and do a little reading, but it's hiding.
And it's even a big book.
I'm sorry, what?
It's even a big book.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah. It's not like you're trying to find, Hezekiah's
Is Lamentations after Psalms? After Jeremiah. After Jeremiah. Here we are, Lamentations. The first chapter, he really shows a sense of just desolation. I'm going to start in verse 13, just getting a sense of how Jeremiah is expressing himself. And I think, too, again, the reason it's interesting in looking at this kind of language in regards to mental wellness is how, and the words that Jeremiah is using to express his feelings. From on high, he sent fire into my bones, and it prevailed over them. He has spread a net for my feet. He has turned me back. He has made me desolate, faint all the day long. The yoke of my transgressions is bound by his hand. They are knit together. They have come upon my neck. He has made my strength fail. The Lord has given me into the hands of those against whom I am not able to stand. The Lord has rejected all my strong men. In my midst he has called an appointed time against me to crush my young men. The Lord has trodden as in a winepress the virgin daughter of Judah. For these things I weep. My eyes run down with water, because far from me is a comforter, one who restores my soul. My children are desolate, because the enemy has prevailed. Zion stretches out her hands. There is no one to comfort her. The Lord has commanded concerning Jacob that the ones round about him should be his adversaries. Jerusalem has become an unclean thing among them. Again, Jeremiah is acknowledging that the sin of the nation has brought this devastation upon his nation. But he internalizes these things for the purpose of telling that story, recording that history. He becomes the nation Israel and how he describes his suffering. But he's really taken this to heart. He is really, from every angle, talking about the hand of God upon him. And the fact that even though they call out for mercy and stretch out the hands, and you'll see that throughout Lamentations, there is starvation and waste and just a total collapse of society, if you want to call it that. Nothing's working right. Sanitation's not working right. There's no food. The children that are nursing, their tongues cleave to the roof of their mouth because their mothers can't even wean them. Or not wean them, but nurse them. And yet these women are still bearing children when there's no resources for the children. And Jeremiah is in a state of mind that this is never going to change. Now, this is contrary to what the psalmist says. And Jeremiah will come back to that. But this is the nature of deep despair and depression. This is the nature of it. And that it feels like it's a permanent condition. And when you're dealing with depression and you're dealing with this level of loss and despair, people will want to say, well, why don't they just shake that off? Why don't they get out of that? Why are they stuck in this routine of these kind of feelings? And I'm not sure I know what the answer is, because the real answers are ineffective on the mind that is trapped in that mode of thinking. Logic and reason are not working well in the mind that is trapped in depression. So, how do you, which is first, the chicken or the egg, right? How do you break that down? And I think Jeremiah is going to walk through. I feel like the poetry walks through this struggle with what he knows of the nature of God and what he knows of the nature of God's judgment upon his nation, with how he's feeling about that punishment. And he is not reconciling those two very well initially in this poem. But as we, kind of explore the mind of the prophet a little bit, I think we have to be very open to the idea that Jeremiah is completely overwhelmed by the way he expresses himself. He is talking about there being just there's nothing that can give him any relief. How he feels is important to how he behaves. And I want to look further at verse 20 and 20 through 22. And he's calling out to God. See, O Lord, for I am in distress. My spirit is greatly troubled. My heart is overturned within me. There's a turmoil within his heart. For I have been very rebellious. In the street the sword slays. In the house it is like death. They have heard that I groan, and there was no one to comfort me. All my enemies have heard of my calamity, and they are glad that thou hast done it. Oh, that thou wouldst bring the day which thou hast proclaimed, that they may become like me. Let all their wickedness come before thee, and deal with them as thou hast dealt with me for all my transgressions. For my groans are many, and my heart is faint. Jeremiah wishes that God was treating his enemies like he's being treated. But you also pick up from Jeremiah's phrasing that there is a sense of shame in the eyes of his enemies. They're happy to see Jeremiah and the nation struggle. They rejoice in it. When you're stuck in a cycle of depression, it feels like the enemies have the upper hand, and that they are reveling in your weakness of heart, your faintness of heart. And it further compounds the feeling of despair. It's like Jeremiah is saying, if not for my sake, at least for the sake of righteousness, would you avenge me upon those that afflict me? Now, when it's a mental state of depression, I'm not sure it's always easy to put your finger on the source being an external source of who it is that afflicts you. I think this affliction from within is, again, part of the struggle that Jeremiah is going through. He is taking and accepting responsibility for his sin. But Jeremiah was not the one leading the nation astray. He was an honest prophet of God. He listened to God's words, and he delivered them faithfully. Jeremiah was not the one bringing this destruction upon the nation. But again, he personifies that as an instrument of God, as a prophet of God. He is called upon to personify that. And I think I said the last time I taught class, woe to be a prophet of God, because they have to take on such circumstances in their own lives that God puts them through in order for him to communicate his message effectively. And Jeremiah is bearing the brunt of this guilt and burden of the sinfulness of his nature when if it was up to him, the nation would have repented and turned. Had his message been received, God said, that's not your problem. If they won't listen to you, that's not your fault. You just do the work that I put before you. But it doesn't stop Jeremiah from suffering. As he sees the suffering around him too, he's sympathetic to the state of his nation, but he's enduring it as well. But I think the point here regarding sort of the mental state that he's in is that although Jeremiah is in direct communication with God, and Jeremiah has a better insight to the true nature of God's character than probably anyone else in the nation, he also succumbs to this idea that there is no relief for the current circumstances. There's no way this is going to get any better. And that's a key to appreciating, understanding mental wellness, is that it can feel so ridiculous to even try to change it. It's just the way things are. And there's no hope. Now, I know this is a lovely, cheerful message for our beautiful Sunday morning. I realize this is not exactly fun to talk about. But as we each deal with life and face things that are challenges for us, or feeling guilt for our past sins, or whatever the circumstances are, I almost use the word trigger, but I think I would prefer to use the word circumstances. Regardless of what the circumstances are, what do we do when we find ourselves in this shape? We can bury ourselves in our sorrow. We can continue to compel ourselves to believe that there's no chance for anything to change or get better. Or we can do some hard work and look for solutions. Solutions won't always come. They won't always come. They won't come easily. But life sometimes is more about the struggle than it is the final outcome. And I think that's a hard truth. Sometimes life's more about the actual work of trying to find God in the midst of sorrow, in the midst of a sinful world, than it is any particular outcome in our lives. A lot of people look at me like they're kind of worried about where this is going, or maybe not too sure. I'd like some thoughts on this idea that I think Jeremiah is expressing here. Does any of this make sense, or does any of this have application, or what is your response to this dilemma that I have thrown out? Yes, sir.
It's one of the hard things about this, especially for people of faith like Jeremiah and a lot of the people that we fellowship with regularly and have close associations with, is that the go-to is that we want to try to help them understand what Jeremiah already knew. He's already been told 70 years and Babylon's going to be overthrown, and the people will be able to go back to Jerusalem. This will all be over with. And he knows that. He doesn't need somebody to tell him that. God told him directly. And he's revealed it to the people. The problem is, in the midst of what you're facing, you can remind yourself over and over and over again, and yet there are still things that just don't add up in our minds. Maybe it's that this is more than what it ought to be. This is too much. I didn't expect it to be this bad. Or whatever the reasons are, we justify in our mind that something just doesn't add up with what we know to be true of God and what God wants for his people, and then we let ourselves spin out of control if we're not careful into believing God doesn't care about me and God's not there and God's forsaken me. And none of those things are true. And if we read Scripture, Psalms, the prophets, and other places, we know that's not true. Because we know this is true. But it doesn't change how we feel. And the problem is that all the things we want to do, like what you said, with secluding ourselves and isolating ourselves in our own thoughts and all those kinds of things, those are all counterproductive to the process.
Yep.
And not going to help us get where we need to go. And so the reality is that as hard as it is, what we have to do to get out of where we are is all of the things we don't want to do. Be with other people, serve other people, get focused on other things, and help get our minds out of this circle of despair that we're in. And so, I mean, that's what God's going to do with Jeremiah. It's what he did with Elijah. It's what Jesus did. It's what all of these different people do is they get busy. He puts them to work. He lets them rest. He lets them recover. And then he puts them to work. And it helps to get them through the struggle that they're facing. Doesn't eliminate it, but it helps.
I agree. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to put a plug in for a book that Brace and I have read. It's called Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy, Discovering the Grace of Lament. And it's a beautiful book about the process. And I would even suggest that even if you're not going through something right now, just like you would prepare for battle, like go ahead and read it. It's an incredible book.
And he uses Lamentations as its base.
We probably ought to put that in the bulletin next week so we can all have a record of that. Yes, sir.
I heard a brother say in a sermon some years ago that Jeremiah preached for 60 years and never saved a soul. You know anything about that?
I guess I've never heard that said or expressed. I don't know whether he saved any souls or not. I don't know who all he influenced with his preaching and how the message was received. Clearly, the nation did call out for mercies from God, and I'm sure many of them had intentions of returning to God's favor by obedience. His message would have been so hard, challenging, I think, to listen to because, as Brace pointed out, he gave the warnings. He told them the coming game plan, if you will. And God doesn't always reveal himself to that specificity that this is going to last for a generation the way he did, or 70 years the way that he did. And yet, I think I said not too long ago that if you know how long something's going to last, you can hold your breath for that long. You can always get through it. But Jeremiah is clearly expressing the challenge of knowing what God has told him, why they're experiencing what they have, and yet he still has this sense of isolation and abandonment. So I don't know. I would think he would have influenced people by his preaching. Yes.
Well, I'll just say this, that shortly after the Babylonian fall, 45,000 people returned to Jerusalem. I don't know how much of that was influenced by Jeremiah's message, but there was still a remnant of God's people.
Sure.
And so certainly there would have been those who heard. And you have to believe, because of the fact that God says, my word will not return to me void, that there were some who heard and repented. I mean, we don't have record of them, but I mean, Jeremiah was faithful to his task.
Yeah.
And we do have 45,000 return under the first wave of people who come back from captivity. So I'd be surprised if some of them weren't at least influenced by the work of him and Daniel and others like them.
Oh, I would think his influence would have improved after what he said came true when they were telling him there's no way. Yes, ma'am.
I have to say that I have avoided the book of Lamentations like the plague, because it is not, course, not considering what, Brace was talking about, that there is in the end. But there's something about reading it now that validates what I have experienced. And since I'm not in the middle of it right now, I really like the idea that it's preparing me and others for the possible battle to come. But I can tell you that this was the last book I ever wanted to read, because it was just overwhelming. But now it seems validating.
Mhm. Yeah, I think part of depression's allure is that you're the only one that feels this way, right? And here we sit in a classroom full of adults, and then I look around and I say, well, I see everyone smiling and talking to one another, and I'm the only one that feels this way. And I know that's not true. And I know that we want to, we want to be functioning, and so we do mask some of our feelings sometimes. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but there does need to be time for honesty with ourselves and honesty with one another regarding the state of mind that we're in. And I have told some of you in private that I have overshared. I feel like I have put too much of my own mental wellness out there, seeking for answers or seeking for comfort or, commiseration. I don't know what I'm looking for sometimes. And I've said I'm trying to actually pull back on that a little bit. But that runs the risk then of that isolation. I'm trying to walk that line where it's not just always pouring out there. I mean, some of the phrasing that Jeremiah says, he says, my liver has become like water and it's poured out. And you think, that's gross. I mean, that's disgusting. He's talking about just this breakdown of his organs to where they are liquefied. And that's how he feels inside. Like his core has turned to liquid. There's no strength in him. And again, how does a man with such character and such commitment to his duty of being a prophet of God express himself in that way? It sounds as though he's lost his faith, but I don't believe he has. I think what he's experienced, though, is the emotional strain and the mental strain of knowing that God's will is being performed in a way that is punishing and destroying the nation in which he lives and loves. He loves the nation of Israel. And he's seeing this desolation. So you've got to keep yourself together. I mean, I don't know what Jeremiah's functional level looked on a day-to-day basis, but he may have curled up in his cot some days and not got out of bed till time for supper. I don't know. I really don't know. But I wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't his reaction facing some of the challenges he was trying to deal with. Did I see another hand? Yes.
Could we talk a little bit about how, not if we're going through it, but if we see your friend going through it, how we should respond? Because there's certain ways we can make the matters worse. But I'd like to hear a little discussion on that too.
Well, I'd love to be able to discuss that with you intelligently. I feel like I have tried to thrust myself in the middle of situations because I have the answers, and that has gone horribly wrong. I feel like there are other times when my influence has been positive, and I've been able to help people. So what was the difference between the situations? How do we know how to act to that?
I obviously don't have all the answers, and sometimes there are no answers. And usually when we're dealing with other people, we don't know clearly what the answers are unless they share with us what's helpful. But I can share from my own perspective, I mean, some of the lessons that I've learned as I've dealt with some of those kinds of feelings. It's going to again be counterintuitive, because we think all we need to do is remind them of the truths of the Word of God,
Mhm.
and that's going to solve all their problems. And the reality is that in most of our cases, we already know those truths. We believe them assuredly, beyond a shadow of a doubt. That's not the problem. And so, for example, with grief and loss, our minds tell us stay away from the subject because it's painful for them. But for those who are going through the grief, frequently within a few months, we feel like we're the only ones still grieving. Everybody else has moved on and everything's fine.
Right.
So it was helpful for me when people would share memories of the one who had passed. Even though it would make me sad and make me cry, it was still helpful to know somebody else still missed her and still thought about her. And so those are things that are counterintuitive, perhaps in our minds, as those who are, want people to be happy and joyful. But those things bring a measure of joy that comes in the form of tears, and it still warms the heart and helps you to feel better where you are in your struggle. And so things like that, I'm not saying that's the solution, solves all the problems, because it doesn't, but it's those kinds of things, walking alongside someone, caring for them, caring for those that they care for, thinking about the kinds of, because you'll talk about the person, and to me that is an open invitation. You want to talk about them. Why would I avoid the subject and act like it's taboo and going to be the wrong direction to go? And we need to get away from this subject because that's the reason you are where you are. So it's frequently going to be different than what you think it's going to look like. And that was the problem with Job's friends. They thought they had all the answers, and they're spilling all these solutions to his problems, and they were no help. And sometimes all we can do is what they did the first week, which is sit there with them and say nothing, because we don't have the answers, but we care. And that's helpful to know that you're not alone.
Beth.
I think that there's, kind of going back to what you said about how you are trying to retreat a little bit, there's a lot of power in sharing what you're going through, because now we can pray for you. God is the most powerful antidepressant that there is. And I know from experience, my whole life is a testament to it. Just the things I have been through, I struggle the most when I haven't turned to him through myself, or turned to him through the power of prayer via other people. Things always come back into alignment when I give it to him. And I tend to want to control my own environment. Oh, I got this, I can do it. Continuous struggles when I'm in that mindset, but the moment I give it to him, because he tells us he's always there waiting for us. He never promised it would be easy, but he did promise he would help us through it. And don't retreat. Keep sharing, because that's our job in caring for you and loving you and other people, is the power of prayer. It's the answer.
Yeah. Eddie, did you have your hand?
Back to what Jeff was asking about, one of the things that I've learned, we can do a disservice to people by telling them that they need to stop thinking about it. Put it away, don't think about it. You need to have more faith, or you're not praying enough. And from personal experience, I've learned that putting things away actually does not make them go away. It actually makes them build up even more. And it could be even more detrimental. And even here
I think because we have a prophet of God who, Lamentations is a sidebar poem to his prophetic work, but it's not, and it's been preserved throughout time for us to use this to understand that Jeremiah is right out there with his feelings, and his feelings towards God, and his feelings that God has left him alone. And I think, again, in dealing with trauma and mental wellness, it's important that we be able to express ourselves to God and be able to maybe moderate the language a little bit to not convince everyone you need to be put in a home somewhere, but the ability to share how those feelings are impacting especially if they're impacting our day-to-day functionality. I think you really need to be opening up for help and seeking it out. But getting out of yourself too is a big part of this, and seeing that others also can use some help, and being willing to be there for them. And so I think mothers are this way more than dads. I know Allison would say, whenever I get sick, that's when the kids seem like they're most dependent upon me. And she says, I'm throwing up in a bucket, and they're going, "Mommy, mommy, mommy," pounding on the bathroom door, and you're off at work, and this is what's going on. But mothers have this strength, this beauty of character, that they can rise up past their own illness and provide for their children. Dads just stay locked in the bathroom. He won't face the kids when they're like that. And that is a good way to push through some of this feeling, is dig down for that inner strength that you need on behalf of the people that rely upon you and need you to care for them. Yes, ma'am.
We have a tool, a helper that we underutilize, and that is Holy Spirit. And I mean, we can ask that He help us to say the things that this person needs, or close their ears if we say something that is not helpful. Close their ears and help them not to hear that. We underutilize Holy Spirit.
Ethan?
I was thinking about just what a lot of people are saying and connecting it to my own experience. And obviously we have to have a balanced view on a lot of things. And so it's like on the one hand, there are times where we just need to sit there quietly and just to be there and have a supporting presence. But on the other hand, I've also found that in things that I've gone through, sure, there are truths
Samantha.
I think another way to help people is to, even though we can't understand all the time what people are going through, even trying to understand is very helpful. Because I've had several instances in my own life where I get very frustrated, not because someone didn't understand, but because they didn't even try to. It's just blowing my feelings off, and that was not helpful. And so, like, when I know somebody's going through something, even if I don't fully understand the situation, putting myself in their shoes and trying to understand it at least.
Yeah, I agree. I think validation of feelings is important. We don't want to be a facilitator in their false feelings, if I can say it that way. But I think it's important that we understand how Jeremiah is expressing himself and how he's feeling. You know, in chapter 3, it really goes into his personal struggle. And now he feels like God has put an impenetrable, just an unmovable stone in his pathway. He is expressing that God himself is interrupting his chance to move forward on his path in life. What does it say? He has turned aside my ways and torn me to pieces. He's made me desolate, verse 11. In chapter 3, I thought that's where the stone in his path was.
Verse 25,
I'm sorry?
maybe verse 25.
Verse 25. The Lord is, of chapter 3. It's not what I'm thinking of as I read it. But he's carrying a heavy chain. Verse 9, he has blocked my ways with hewn stone. He has made my path crooked. So the only way that Jeremiah sees forward is to get past the resistance that God himself has created. That's his mindset. And we'll continue to talk about that. I'm not ignoring sort of answering the solutions to, what's our response to this. I'm hoping to get to more of that, but laying more of the groundwork for how we're seeing mental wellness expressed in the language of the Bible, and understanding that when God is recording this for us for all times, that is a validation for the process that his people are going through. And of all folks that we would say would be strong enough not to see it this way, we might pick Jeremiah as one. But again, he's being used as an instrument for God to help us understand ourselves and understand how to deal with the struggles that we have within our own minds, within our own hearts. Okay? All right, I appreciate all the help today in class. I don't know how this class hour can go so fast, too.